What if the most powerful moment on the cross wasn't the darkness, the earthquake, or Te torn veil, but the three words Jesus spoke? It is finished, John las 7:30 de la noche. We remember his suffering, his silence, his final breath, but we often miss the deeper war, the one raging between defeat and declaration, where Jesus didn't whisper a surrender. He shouted a conquest. The Greek word used, tetelestai, wasn't a sigh of exhaustion. It was a cry of completion. In ancient times, it was written on receipts to mean paid in full. It was shouted by generals when a battle was won. Jesus wasn't saying, "I'm done." He was saying, "It's done." And that changes everything. There's a story from Nigeria of a man who, after years of guilt and shame, read this verse and broke down. He said, "I thought I had to keep paying for my sins." But when he realized Jesus shouted, "Titla," he understood. It was erased. He says, that word didn't bring relief. It brought revolution. I wasn't forgiven because I improved. I was free because he finished. That's the heart of this moment. Your freedom isn't partial. It's purchased. And the same Jesus who declared victory over sin declares freedom over your past. Not because you earned it, but because he ended it. But it is finished wasn't just about sin. It was about system. The old covenant required endless sacrifices. Blood had to be shed year after year. But Jesus didn't offer a temporary fix. He offered a final sacrifice. Hebrews 10:12 says, "But when this priest had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God." That's not routine. It's revolution. He didn't collapse from exhaustion. He sat in authority. The work wasn't incomplete. It was concluded. There's a story from Brazil of a woman raised in legalism, believing she had to confess the same sins daily to stay clean. She said, "I was trapped in a cycle of shame." But when she read that Jesus sat down, not because he was tired, but because his work was done, she says, "I realized he didn't need to keep sacrificing, and I don't need to keep begging." That's the truth. You don't have to keep paying for what was already paid. And the same Savior who sat down at God's right hand is saying to you, stop striving. Stop confessing the same sin like it wasn't covered. My blood was enough. My work was complete. Now, rest. So stop living under guilt. Stop thinking you're one mistake away from losing your salvation, because the same Jesus who said, "It is finished," is saying to you, your past is paid. Your place is secured. Now, walk in freedom. But "it is finished" wasn't just about atonement, it was about access. At that moment, the temple veil tore from top to bottom, Matthew 27-51. This wasn't just fabric, it was a barrier. 60 feet high, 4 inches thick, guarded by priests. Only the high priest could enter the Holy of Holies, and only once a year, with blood. But when Jesus died, the veil was torn. Not from the bottom up, but from the top down. God didn't wait for man to break in. He ripped open the way. There's a story from India of a man from a low caste who was forbidden from entering temples. He said, "I felt like God was distant." But when he learned about the torn veil, he says, "I realized Jesus didn't just die for me. He destroyed the wall between me and God. Today, he ministers to outcasts. He says, the veil wasn't just torn, it was taken away. And now, I don't need permission to approach God. I have a Passover lamb who opened the door. That's the gospel. You don't need a priest to reach God. You have a priest who became the sacrifice, and the same Jesus who tore the veil tears down every barrier. Race, religion, reputation, so you can come boldly to the throne of grace. So stop thinking you're too broken to be near him. Stop believing you need to clean up before you come, because the same Savior who said, "It is finished," is saying to you, the door is open. The way is clear. Come, not in perfection, but in petition. But it is finished wasn't just about access. It was about authority. Jesus didn't die as a victim. He died as a victor. He chose the cross. He dismissed his spirit, Matthew 27-50. He wasn't taken. He gave himself. And in that moment, he didn't just defeat sin. He disarmed powers, shattered darkness, and stripped hell of its hold. Colossians 2:15 says he disarmed the powers and authorities. He made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. That's not defeat. That's dethronement. There's a story from Kenya of a woman delivered from generational curses. She said, "My family had a history of addiction, poverty, and early death. But when she understood that Jesus' cry of 'it is finished' broke every curse, she says, I didn't just pray for freedom. I proclaimed it, because if Jesus ended the power of sin, he ended the power of my past." That's the pattern. The cross wasn't the end of Christ's power. It was the expression of it. And the same Jesus who triumphed over hell triumphs over your bondage. Not by removing it, but by ruining it. So stop fearing the enemy. Stop thinking darkness has the last word, because the same Savior who said, "It is finished," is saying to you, the war is won. The chains are broken. Now, live like you're free. But "it is finished" wasn't just about victory. It was about vision. Jesus wasn't looking at the nails. He was looking at the next generation. Hebrews 12:2 says he endured the cross for the joy set before him. What joy? The joy of redeemed lives, of restored relationships, of a bride prepared for her king. He saw you. He saw your pain, your past, your potential, and he said, "Worth it." There's a story from Egypt of a former drug dealer who, after conversion, asked, "Why would Jesus die for someone like me?" But when he realized Jesus looked past his crimes and saw his calling, he says, "I understood. My life wasn't an accident. It was his agenda." And when aside "it is finished," he wasn't just ending his mission, he was launching mine. That's the heart of grace. Your life isn't a mistake. It's a mission. And the same Jesus who finished his work begins yours. Not because you're ready, but because he's risen. The real victory wasn't in the death. It was in the declaration. And the same war Jesus fought, between despair and destiny, between shame and salvation, is raging in your life today. You may not be on a cross, but you're in a place where guilt whispers, "You're not enough," and grace shouts, "It is finished." And in that place, you're asking, is it really over? But Jesus isn't asking you to earn freedom. He's inviting you to embrace it. There's a story from South Korea of a woman who, after years of depression, read John 19:30 and said, "I felt like the weight of the world was lifted." She says, "I didn't feel better because of a feeling. I believed a fact. My sin was paid. My shame was broken." And Jesus didn't whisper done. He shouted it, and that changed everything. That's the heart of grace. You don't need to finish your healing. He finished your redemption. And the same Jesus who declared victory declares your value. Not because of what you've done, but because of what he's done. But there's a warning. Freedom without faith leads to frustration. Many live under grace, but walk in guilt. They believe in forgiveness, but act like it's temporary. But Jesus didn't die to make you almost free. He died to make you fully free. There's a story from Uganda of a pastor who, after moral failure, believed he could never serve again. He said, "I kept confessing, but still felt condemned." But when he meditated on Tetelestai, he realized, Jesus didn't die for me to keep paying. He died to stop the cycle. He returned to ministry, not in pride, but in power. He says, the cross wasn't a suggestion. It was a settlement. And when I stopped striving, I started serving. That's the truth. Your past isn't a prison. It's a platform. And the same Savior who said, "It is finished," is saying to you, stop rehearsing your failure. Start resting in your freedom. And let my finished work fuel your future. There's a story from Nigeria of a young man raised in a cult, taught that salvation required endless rituals. He said, I was exhausted. But when he heard, "It is finished," he says, I collapsed in worship. I didn't need to keep performing. I just needed to believe. Today, he shares the gospel boldly. He says, Jesus didn't say, keep going. He said, it's done. And that set me free. That's the pattern. Religion demands. Grace delivers. Ritual drains. Redemption declares. The same Jesus who finished the work of salvation finishes the work of transformation. Not in your strength, but in His Spirit. So keep going. Keep believing. Keep living like it's finished. Because it is. And the same Lord who shouted from the cross is shouting to you. Your debt is paid. Your darkness is defeated. Your destiny is secured. Now, rise. Not in your power, but in His. And let the world see. Your life isn't a mess. It's a message of mercy, bought by blood, sealed by a shout.